Alrighty, hello every folks, and good morning. Welcome to part 2 of Know Your Unit here. So next we got the probably next most maligned unit in the game here, which would be the Terror Knight. Now, we do know, this question's actually come up quite a few times, that when it comes to Reborn, they will more than likely have, well, they already said that they've gone through and they've readjusted all the classes, so, you know, I'm pretty sure some stuff has changed. But for a little bit of background story here, this is a unit that's kind of had a hard time finding its place throughout the series. Way back on the SNES, back on March of the Black Queen and all that, it was basically the male equivalent of the Valkyrie, being a switch hitter unit. You'd basically throw out in the back or front row, depending on what you needed at the time, basically being a sort of spellcaster, fireball, or axe kind of dude, more or less being a chaotic promotion for your knights, and a very, a unit that kind of came in a weird position because your knights were usually going to be, you know, good, and then usually your knights would end up going lawful, and then it's like you have a chaotic promotion to your lawful unit. It's not one that a lot of folks had seen. In fact, I'd gone through the game probably 3 or 4 times before I even realized that they weren't a NPC only class. But anyway, yeah, so this is a unit that basically became the de facto kind of ultimate frontliner then in Let Us Cling Together, losing out on their spellcasting abilities and instead becoming the vitality specialist of all things, but being entirely limited to chaotic units. So they were ridiculously strong, and in fact, like when I was going through it, they ended up being a archer with, well, an archer with especially high vitality was my leader dude. It was kind of neat. Anyway. After that, though, in OB64, they once again retained their switch hitter role. However, you were limited in how many you could actually get for them. You could pretty much farm their items on one map. So it was a class that was interestingly limited in terms of its availability. But, you know, still pretty fun to play around with. And then finally, we get to the remake here, where they are... Well, here's the thing about their role. Judging by the heavy armor, all of the spikes, and the fact that they're usually deployed as frontliners, usually the thought would be, well, this is a heavy frontliner unit meant to fight alongside the knight. They're basically the male equivalent of, if you combined the Witch from previous games and the Warlock from Knight of Lotus. You might have noticed I never brought it up for Knight of Lotus. That's because the entirety of the purpose of the class, namely the kind of AoE morale-crushing mechanic that they've got going on, I didn't even mention it up to this point because it doesn't really come up very often, is that was just kind of relegated to an emblem in that game. They didn't actually exist there. So yeah, then we get to this version, and what's interesting is they've got the most mechanical depth in the PSP remake. However, they also are generally considered a terrible unit, but that's largely because their actual benefits are completely non-transparent here. So okay, what am I talking about with them being a disruption unit? Well, you already know they're going to be a spellcaster, all that kind of thing. But let's take a look at the kinds of stuff that they can actually learn in terms of how useful it all is, because this is going to be the probably first and point here. First of all, the drain abilities are actually surprisingly decent. However, in most cases, the only one you'll end up realistically using, you know, early on into your adventures through this game will probably be drain power. In fact, many guides put this out there back in the day, where you would basically have them run up, use drain power on something, and then use them as a finisher spammer, which works, but it also kind of doesn't jive with the fact that they need to use their TP in order to power up their other skills. But still, it's a viable strategy, but like I was saying earlier, there's generally a lot of confusion as to what their role is. So these are all basically the equivalent of a, like, you know, bottom tier, Word of Pain, you know, tier 1 kind of ability, which means that they are going to be absolutely crappy in terms of penetration. However, you know, power is the one that was considered to be kind of the best there, because it technically doesn't check for any defense thing. It's just going to get a certain amount of TP no matter what. Because yeah, you don't have TP armor, but you do have armor against your MP and HP. So that's kind of up there. Like you got your Vit and your strength and all, or you know, and your resistance that's going to be blocking this one, meaning it's going to fall off pretty quickly. Same thing for MP. You get the general idea. Anyway, Instill Shadow. This is primarily useful for boosting up your Dark Augment throughout the game. Shadow Guard. Oddly enough, one of the few guard abilities that's actually worth using, because a lot of things will end up spamming a lot of Dark abilities, and this has a pretty large area of effect. So, something you can quickly throw out there if you're having a problem in, like, let's say, Palace of the Dead. Next up, we have Paralytic Wave. This is the one that they're going to be using the most, and one that I see mentioned as something that they can't get the Terror Knight to hit, and we'll get to that in a moment. And then we have Sleep and a bunch of other debuffs here as well. They don't get Charm, they don't get Dominate, they do get Gravity Flux, which again seems like a weird one, because oftentimes the assumption is that it only affects movement, but it also vastly affects dodge rate. So basically, if you have a unit that's very dodgy, you hit them with Gravity Flux. In a lot of cases, there's going to be low mind and low resistance on a unit that's going to be defending against this. So usually, they're actually better at dealing with more nimble units. We'll get to more of that in a moment. But as you can see, their actual spell list is not terribly impressive. But here's where it gets a little bit weird. So the main reason that your debuffs probably aren't landing, I know I'm probably going to mention this every single time it comes up here, but Spell Strike. It is one of those things that so often gets just left by the wayside because it's like, oh, it's magic accuracy. My fireballs or whatever else hit just fine. I don't need more accuracy. I need more power. And yes, Spellcraft is good. However, in this case, Spellcraft only affects the Drain abilities. They're the only possible thing that they're actually getting a benefit out of here when it comes to this class. So, generally speaking, it's not actually worth taking the Spellcraft here, just simply because they're tier 1 abilities. They're literally only going to be useful for bullying things. So if you do have a unit that's kind of going and functioning around the flanks or something like that, or you can boost their intelligence and mind high enough, then and only then is it actually worthwhile to take Spellcraft. So early on, usually what I would recommend is actually starting off with Augment Dark, essentially using Instill and the Drain abilities to boost this. If you didn't know, again, Instill gives your weapon the properties of an elemental weapon, which will essentially mean that they will be able to train up their abilities while counterattacking and things like that. So, potentially useful thing for getting those skills up there. But Augment increases penetration, Spellcraft increases penetration. You combine all that, you give them a Spellcraft buff off of an item, and they actually can do moderate damage with their Drain abilities. Is it going to be super oppressive? No. But it's a nice little kind of backup plan for other things. Usually I would recommend that they just heal with an item instead and then put themselves in position to counter. But, you know what? It could potentially be an option for you. But I really would not recommend building towards that, even though this seems like this is going to be your Gafgarian class. Anyway, so yeah, Spell Strike is generally going to be far better. Paralytic Wave is something that has a pretty decent chance to hit to begin with. This will make it near guaranteed. Something like Sleep is also pretty likely to hit. Again, this will make it near guaranteed. So this can mean that they can essentially have a really, really good chance of landing their debuffs. Now, the rest of their abilities are a funky thing. So I was mentioning earlier about Augment Darkness. The funny part is, I would recommend it, but also not recommend it. Because Aug Dark specifically only affects two things for the Terror Knight. Their very final weapons, and their limited missile abilities, which, honestly, wouldn't recommend going for either of them, but it's there as an option, because, this is a class that's actually pretty versatile, but very oddly specifically versatile. So, Augment Darkness, honestly, would probably recommend just not doing that. Because, bizarrely, let's take a look at the class's stats real quick. If you were to guess what this big, chunky, spiky-looking dude, and/or the Power Rangers-looking lady that looks like she just came out of a diving suit, if you were to think, what is this unit a specialist in? You might think, maybe strength, maybe defense, maybe they're some kind of resistance specialist, maybe, I don't know, they're some kind of slowdown specialist. Yeah, no, you'd be wrong. Their highest stat is actually avoidance. They do get high strength as well. They're matched in terms of that, but yes, strength and avoidance. This is effectively an evasive sword fighter. With debuff support. This is why I was saying they're kind of like the Warlock from Knight of Lotus. One of the higher kind of bonuses when it comes to attack there, like for comparison, as far as how high their bonuses get, it's not amazingly high. The rogues are going to be higher, but they're on the higher end of penetration bonuses as far as that goes. Their vitality is a little bit lower. Their dexterity is very low. Their agility is fairly low, which is why they need to make use of something like Terrifying Impact in order to guarantee their hits. And then their mind is fairly low, which, again, seems a little bit weird, considering their intelligence is higher and they're not a damage dealer, and their mind is lower, but they're a debuff caster. But that's why they get higher ranks of Spellcraft, or rather higher ranks of Spell Strike and lower ranks of Spellcraft. Weirdly enough, to make up for their stats. Again, I feel like this is going to be way less confusing in Reborn, but let's get to it here. What kind of stuff can you actually do with this janky bastard? Well, the first and most obvious one is right here. We have a guy that's going for axes, going for movement. They're going to be recovering off of Field Elk. They've got Anatomy for obvious reasons. They've got Ogdark for their endgame weapon, maxing out at a Ogdark 11 there. Strengthen for that bonus damage. Lament of the Dead to increase said bonus damage. Rampart Aura to keep stuff close, to keep Lament hitting. Constitution to keep their beefiness up. And then Dodge, because they, interestingly enough, are one of the few heavy classes to actually get maximum rank dodge. So they're going to be very good as far as that goes. So that's their situation. They don't need a shield because they're intended to block and parry and everything else. Now, how would I actually improve this build? Well, for one thing, their movement isn't exactly going to be super necessary. They get into position, it's fine. Slowing enemies down around them, though, that is pretty important. So Rampart Aura plus Lament of the Dead, great combination. And spamming Lament of the Dead, even at 30%, is actually really, really strong. You can max this out and pretty much have near guaranteed chances for that to hit, so great skill, but it doesn't improve accuracy any. So, in this case, the actual better option would be, rather than Swiftfoot, and please bear in mind I put a lot of these classes together when I was just basically dead tired about a couple of days ago here. So instead, we would give them True Strike. So in this case, they no longer need their Terrifying Impact, but they've got Lament of the Dead to put fear in an AoE around them. They're going to be ranking that up over time, essentially just making them a dodgy melee fighter. And this is actually what most of the NPCs will end up running. And probably that's why I know that I personally have this memory throughout the whole game, through years of challenge running this thing, of like, man, why are Branton's friggin' frontliners here so dodgy? They must have weird stats or something. And it's because this is like the build they always run, but for some reason it mentally doesn't click because it just doesn't seem like something that class should be doing. This dude does not look agile, but historically, yeah, actually, people in armor were pretty fast. So, oh well. But yeah, so evasive, kind of dodgy counter build frontliner, very, very good. In fact, in this case, probably instead of see, that's the thing. Like, this is a weird moment because they kind of need all of this stuff to do something good, because they've got a pretty strong end game weapon. They probably can do without the plus 12 attack. So we probably can actually turn this into something like a parry, wherein, the thing is, okay, in, like, the super late game, when dealing with ranged attacks, it's kind of a funny situation, because you either want to have something like Field Elk to just heal out of something, you want to have Deflect to potentially get rid of it entirely, but that's less reliable, or you want to have something like Sidestep. However, Sidestep, due to the fact that ranged weapons end up really spiking in accuracy towards the end game, especially if they're taking something like True Flight, will end up essentially getting nullified entirely if you have anything other than rank 4. Again, I'm assuming this will be a lot more consistent in Reborn there. But yeah, so usually what I would recommend is just, like, unless you have access to Sidestep 4, or you just have really high evasion, just forget that that's a thing and just assume you're going to have to heal out of it. Something like Fortify would end up... something like Fortify or Deflect is far more likely to work than Sidestep in the endgame. But anyway, so that's kind of that there. What else can you potentially do with these? So, like, let's say you had a situation where you really, 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 really wanted to have just a weirdly specific spellcaster unit. So that's what we've got right here. We've got a guy that's specializing in Mind, going up to 238 on the Mind score in this case, going for a few little stacks of different things, like, for example, Daedalus here, to improve penetration of that crappy iron fan. This is really not going to help very much, by the way. So +2 anatomy, just mostly for defensive reasons, and also to make this thing hit slightly more. It's about 100 damage deficient of where it needs to be for the end game, but that's fine, don't worry about it. Mostly going for vitality stacks off of these pieces of equipment to keep them out of aggro, more or less, and then Ring of the Mind to make their debuffs more likely to hit. We've got a Evil Eye here on this shield, which should hopefully work pretty well with their kind of disruption build here, because they do make excellent disruption units. Just, you know, they're a little bit slow is the thing. They're certainly not the fastest. Like, compared with a just random Hydra here, like the Hydra's running RT89, these guys are running like 116, 120, that kind of thing. Like random, like even if they're basically the same speed as Fusiliers, who are intentionally slow. Something like ninjas would be at about 100, so they're noticeably slower, and this definitely compounds over time. So that's kind of their big issue there. In this case, because they're going for more of a spellcaster build, I put Augment Dark on this guy to maybe give them a chance of bullying some weaker units. Fearful Impact, because Fear plus Stun plus Guaranteed Hit off of that fan is actually pretty handy. Again, they're going for a Disruption build here. Counterattack, so that they can set up the Fearful Impact and just basically use that as a defensive counter, more or less. Dodge for obvious reasons, Spell Strike for obvious reasons, Spellcraft for obvious reasons, Expand Mind because they're going to be spamming debuffs, Jump 1 to essentially get them potentially on higher tiles where they might be able to defend themselves a little bit better. Constitution to keep their health up, Dark Magic for obvious reasons, and yeah, this is basically a defensive disruptor kind of thing, so that's pretty handy there. You actually can do this a little bit better with some other weapon options. Like, for example, if we go down the hammers here, we see a few different things that they could do. For example, if you wanted to go for more of the offensive spellcaster variant, you've got some one-handed endgame weapons that do have stuff like Spark Sphere on there. Usually they're going to be enough casts to help you deal with stuff. If you want to go for more of a healing support, you can go for Quench on the Aqua Hammer. I mean, there's other ways to have terrible ideas, but there you go, that's one. And, you know, you got Stun Breath on the Sanguine Hammer here. Could potentially be useful, maybe combine that into a Dragon Slayer set kind of thing. But yeah, generally speaking, you really want to dedicate towards one particular thing with these guys. Just because, yeah, they're a kind of a multifaceted class that you really don't want to be doing too many different things with. But for example, in this particular case, if we had something like the Sagara, that actually would allow them to fully dedicate to being an offensive spellcaster, getting Word of Pain 3, getting Stockproof, and getting additional Aug Dark on there. So, you know, something like this could actually be fairly effective straight into the end game there. Alright, next up we have what I consider the Enforcer build. This is probably the single strongest potential unit in the game, bizarrely enough. So here's what we've got. So, Damask Crossbow +1, so strongest weapon in the game, has stun effect on hit. Again, you might be thinking like light crossbow, what the hell, if you haven't seen any of those multiplayer videos. But yeah, stun effect on hit, +2, so its actual penetration is about 108 here, with 14% bonus damage on there. Not super amazing, but it's more than enough. The Ogre set to vastly improve strength of strength both physically and both offensively and defensively. I believe this is actually just a bonus in both directions because it makes them nigh invulnerable, and it also means that when you get rank 6 on this crossbow, that Death Whale will instantly kill anything in the game, no questions asked. And then you have stuff like the Reaver Ring here for dealing with their issue with A being stopped potentially because, you know, low mind, they're going to have a hard time resisting debuffs, as well as allowing themselves to move a little bit faster. Due to the Ogre defense, they're able to sacrifice the accessory slot for that kind of thing. Anatomy for, you know, penetration, defense, all that kind of thing. Crossbow for obvious reasons. However, Wade seems like a weird one, because normally they can't go into water. They're one of the few cases where a class can actually switch its movement type based off of its skill. So normally you can't knock a Terror Knight in the water, and that's kind of a benefit all its own. However, putting something like Wade on there allows them to just go into the water, and suddenly nothing else that can go into the water can even target them. With something like the Ogre set, they can completely resist incoming damage and fully potentially heal out of it. And yeah, just allows them to more or less take safety tiles on certain maps. Overpower allows for getting past parries and just deflects. it wouldn't go past. Well, they wouldn't. They can go past parries, but they're not using a melee attack in this particular case. I mean, potentially, yeah, you could shield stuff off a cliff. I guess there's that for overpower. Anyway, point being, overpower nullifies safety skills. Rampart Aura, again, just for keeping stuff away from them, because they are a crossbow build. Lament of the Dead, that if they decide, they can actually go forward and offensively fear a bunch of stuff. It allows them to kind of do that whole, like, shield bash into a lament type of situation. More useful than you think, because you can basically just cause a bunch of units to suddenly have to take additional time because they're blocked by units that they... okay, think about it this way. Think about the, like, area of effect circle around them, okay? So, say there's a guy on, you know, that's going to be coming in, and if they were to take a move, they would end up being on, like, that top point of the diamond there. But if you were to shield bash a unit backwards into that tile, and then use Lament of the Dead, suddenly you have a chance to roll Fear on all of those units. However, you've also basically created a safety bubble for yourself with Rampart Aura, because nobody will be able to pass through those other units unless they have Siege, in which case they're sacrificing some movement anyway, which means that there's a pretty good chance that they're not getting past that whole thing anyway. And now we breathe. Anyway, so strength and dodge for obvious reasons. Probably would actually, this might be one of those cases where it's probably worth going for something like Spell Ward instead, which, I mean, they have Spell Ward right here. Spell Ward 2, unlike something like Sidestep, actually is worth using, because it's anything spell-wise is going to be far more affected on the defensive side. Something like Dodge, really melee units are kind of their big threat there. While they could use Sidestep, it's mostly a moot point for them. They're probably getting hit anyway. So probably an improvement on this right off the bat would just end up being the option to fully heal off of Field Alchemy, if I can remember that it's at the bottom of the list, not at the top. Good job. In fact, I don't think I even had them unlocked on this particular one, so we'll just temporarily give them 200 extra health instead. So yeah, not even going any spellcraft variant, or any spell variant whatsoever, except for defensive stuff on this one. But yeah, basically that's the Enforcer, a very, very, very effective build right there. Would recommend Field Alchemy instead, but this is my test file / well, one of like 30 test files, but anyway. Point being, you get the Field Alchemy, you put it on there, all that kind of thing. Steadfast, by the way, incredibly useful, because falling off cliffs is very likely for these guys, because they tend to be slower, which means that they are more likely to be in a position where they're nearby a cliff, or that it might be potentially useful for them to be by said cliff and then, you know, faceplant into ye dirt. Not a fun time for them. Alright, so apparently didn't finish off with those guys. Was going for a full vitality and spell kind of deal with this one. Neat. If you're going for an earlier game type of thing, this is all like less than level 20 type stuff. Two-hander build, focusing on evasion. Very useful to have something like the Claymore +1. In fact, this is one of those early game weapons that really punches above its weight for them. Very easy upgrade. I believe it's a card in like steel and iron, and that's it. But on top of that, you're basically going for dexterity and avoidance in this particular case, to make use of their dodge stats, as well as the fact that they can use a terrifying impact in conjunction with breach to more or less completely break a unit defensively, to the point where they will be essentially getting the full benefit of that 20% bonus damage off of breach. So very, very effective thing there, especially if they decide to take another attack before retreating, potentially setting up for a pretty punishing counter on that one. Next up, we have a early game variant of the Enforcer back there, going for a Balder crossbow instead. The silence effect is going to be far more noticeable. Deflect off the heater shield, pretty useful for a hammer build, not very useful for a ranged build here, but that's some pretty high vitality on it. Brigand in for the extra defense, or not defense, but dex. And then Damask Helm for the extra vit, as well as more vit off this ring. Generally speaking, if you're going for defense, really stack that defense. But in this particular case, they're actually going for a combination debuff caster and ranged unit. Going for knockback to potentially maybe knock some stuff off of cliffs, because, like crossbow, pretty good potential weapon for kind of tapping stuff off of cliffs. But yeah, combine that with jump so that they can get better angles on those shots, and then they can, more or less, if they can't get a good shot, they end up going for something like paralysis. They don't need to end up having any extra MP abilities, because they are primarily a kind of like a heavy skirmisher type of deal. Going for demonology in this particular case, just because that Balder crossbow will be helping them out in the undead department. All right, next, if we wanted to go for a wind type of deal, while also kind of pivoting into their debuff caster type of situation, we've got something like this, where we have the ability for them to teleport. We have additional penetration off hammers off this thing, augment air off of 2 pieces of their equipment, as well as a Black Willow here. Going for, I believe I had Spellcraft on this guy, or Spell Strike on this guy too. If not, I really should. Instead of Deflect, we're actually going to put Spell Strike on there, which was up here somewhere. There we go. Basically, a better chance for that Black Willow to hit. If you have a use effect on a weapon, in many cases it is worth pivoting into that potential thing. But this guy's going for more of like a Juggernaut kind of deal, going for a True Strike, Constitution, Strengthen. They're not even going for any of these special Terranite skills. They're really just going more for hitting stuff hard and fast. So potentially an option with them as well. If you wanted to go for more of a watery support type thing, they get another weapon with Quench. I don't know why they have so many options for Quench. They just really like their Gatorade Knights, I guess. I don't know. Anyway, good VIT options off all this stuff. Just going for the full blue build here. Just very, very, very blue on all this equipment. But still, solid weapon here. Quench if something gets hit by poison. Not super amazing, but whatever. It's there. I think half of these guys I didn't even finish building. If you wanted to go for a good, another kind of a quicker and potentially more versatile spellcraft, or not spellcraft, but kind of like a hammer and board kind of build here with spell options. This is actually another one that showed up in the multiplayer tests a whole bunch. So basically, hammer for additional penetration off the hammer, because the flame flail is, it's not exactly the highest attack value, but it does have Spark Sphere 3 on there, combined with multiple Aug Fires off all these pieces of equipment. So they're essentially maxing out their Aug Fire, but in this particular case, what we would do is we would automatically end up going down into their hammers for obvious reasons. Now, hammers also have a finisher showing up at rank 6, which will give them a pretty big AoE that also scales off of fire, so this is a really good kind of synergy there. So we combine that with an Aug Fire here. I mean, even without any training whatsoever, they're pretty well stocked up on it. We get them Steadfast because we don't want them getting knocked around. We're not going to bother with Strengthen too much because that's not really something that this thing is going to be getting a whole lot of bonuses off of. We are going to be going for a Deflect, or actually no, not Deflect, but a Parry, because they're going to be trying to stay in the front lines as much as possible. This is in many ways the kind of classic build for the Terranite here. Let's see what else we got here. We're gonna want to go ahead and probably give them counter, just additional damage. Why not? We don't need knockback because we've already got that on the shield. We're gonna put jump again so they can get better angles on their spells. It's something that doesn't come up super often, but still, it's good to have there. Anyway, Constitution 4. We're gonna combine that with dodge. And we're not going to go for Fortify at all, because in this case they've got high health to potentially take a hit, but they've got Field Alec to heal out of it, but essentially having lower defense but higher health with high dodge means that they're still going to be hard to kill, but also they're potentially going to be causing an enemy unit to waste turns. So, pretty handy in that particular case, and you might have potentially run into this situation yourself when playing through it. If you want to go for an earlier kind of defensive type thing here, Damask +1, not actually a terrible option for them. It's another weapon with a triple hit finisher that you can actually kind of pivot into. It's pretty easy to raise cudgels because they've got a very fast swing animation, and also they've got a stun effect on counter. So again, this is another option for a stun plus fear type hit on there. Augment Earth, just because these pieces of equipment have they had some kind of good bonuses. What the hell was I going on? I think I was just going for intelligence bonuses on these, as well as additional cudgel penetration off the Saint Earring. Then potentially you could also go for a Brimstone Hail build with the crossbow here with something like this, just going for more Aug Fire on top of a Ring of Vit. And then this right here is kind of the quote-unquote intended build here. Kind of, sort of. So like in the end game, the Dark Headsman isn't exactly difficult to get a hold of. It's just an upgrade of the Headsman that you find pretty frequently. Comes with the Aug Dark. It's one of the few things that you'd have them having Aug Dark for, but even then, it's, whatever. Honestly, even if you end up maxing it out, there's better uses of that skill slot, but if you are going for a defensive swordsman's kind of thing with Lament of the Dead, this is the one weapon that can basically guarantee you perfect accuracy on that. So again, it doesn't check for resistances, defenses of any kind, so potentially pretty useful pivot there. If you didn't know, fear is one of the only cases where you can move armor up and down, so that's why if you end up having pretty much guaranteed chance to hit in a large area, then you wind up with a case where they basically can completely cripple offense and defense for multiple units at once in a way that can't be resisted unless they've got like a resist fear or fear proof. So that's pretty handy there. Worm scale on here because it's available around the same time. Generally going to be the kind of bonuses that you're looking for. Getting strength bonuses off of these for both physical power and defense, and then Ring of Vit for obvious reasons. And then essentially would end up going into a dodge type of thing. So strengthen for additional bonus damage. That thing is getting 15% extra bonus off dark if it were to penetrate. So counterattack also helpful there, dodge also helpful there, not going for fortify, again because this is a dodge build. Lament of the Dead, 30% base value, you get 5% per rank, so you're automatically going up to 40% using this this particular weapon, and then you can essentially get that up to 80% once you're all done there. Reflect magic, because they can actually be they will take spell damage. That's one of their issues that's kind of hard to overcome. Swords for obvious reasons, Anatomy for obvious reasons, Parry for obvious reasons, Field Alchemy for just kind of a backup plan. They're one of those classes that oftentimes would be better off just using medicine on themselves and just attacking with counterattacks for the most part, and active skills, or action skills rather. Tactician to guarantee that they can keep spamming Lament of the Dead, and dodge and counter as you'd expect. So all right, so that's kind of the deal here. You get the idea. They're a disruptor unit. They've got a lot of potential options despite having a fairly limited item pool to actually pull from. Their shield options are, they've got shield options. That's not the problem. It's the fact that they've got no weapons to go with those shields, so you can potentially just go for a shield and fear kind of setup. Usually combining that with a fan is pretty good. If you have a lady unit, Og Dark off of the Chaldia combined with a full dark set actually could be pretty useful. Additionally, this is actually the one way you can give them charm, so potentially something very useful there. So you can essentially turn them into a Knight of Lotus kind of a witch in that particular case. It's a very weird way to do so, but hell, even in multiplayer this actually worked surprisingly. So just Spell Strike plus the Chaldia, it works. The Og Dark is good for boosting that penetration of the drain skills. So if you want to call it the Suck and Charm build, there you go. But it is what it is. And yeah, use item effects are very strong in this class. Actually, something like right here with the, where the hell was it? I just had that hammer, dang it, where's the Valitas? So something like Valitas, despite being a primarily dark class, going for a light build on this, potentially very strong, because, the Valitas is really strong, and potentially Spirit Surge is really good there. Interestingly, they've got this bizarre kind of synergy with the fact that they get access to a lot of elemental weapons. And the fact that they don't really need their augments that much means that if you go into an elemental temple, you give them a matching weapon, they'll automatically be functioning better in that area. Just due to prevailing element. They have a tendency to not get a ton of scaling options, but they also tend to have a lot of weapons that, will potentially benefit from those scaling options. So if you're matching the environment that they're in, they could potentially perform really well there, especially with the one-handed hammer variants. But yeah, for example, Flame Flail in the Flame Temple. If you didn't know, every time that they spam one of their abilities, it'll end up getting a little bit stronger, which means that if they penetrate at all, they're getting a lot more bonuses, and you're basically getting 4 extra damage per every time that somebody casts that particular spell, give or take. So potentially a lot of really useful stuff there in the right circumstances. But yeah, so that's about that. Hopefully it's at least something interesting to think about. And yeah, there's your kind of breakdown on ye old spooky boys here. So y'all have a good one. Oh, side effects. I probably should mention that. Mostly it's just the Dark Deeds thing. So if you wanted to skip the Lament of the Dead build, there's actually an upgraded version. If you just use Dark Armor, Skull Mask, and Dagda's Hammer, you could actually also sub in Shadow Greaves for this. Basically, this is the classic set that used to give you full mind control powers in the original version. In this one, it just gives you an upgraded version of Lament of the Dead that's, I believe, guaranteed to hit. So, if you got these items, there you go. I mean, it's good. It works. You know, you get your Ogdark, you get your Stoneproof, you get your Petra Burst, so combine this with a Spellcraft, and there you go. You pretty much got the ultimate build here. Despite what many guides might potentially tell you, the Ogre Blade set with this build is just, it's not great. This is fine, like, it'll do the job, but, like, compare the fact, like, okay, this gives you bonuses, fine, that's fine. Let's compare this with this over here. You get guaranteed, you don't have to take Lament of the Dead as a skill anymore, so you're saving a skill slot. It's going to be far easier to get the Shadow set than it will be the Ogre set. You're getting another skill on top of this. The finishers for hammers are a lot better. You're actually getting multiple different debuff casts off these different weapons, so you're getting an entirely different spell list to the point that, like, you've already got Paralytic Wave, you got Petra Burst, you got Dead Scream, you realistically don't even need Dark Magic anymore, but you can put Spellcraft on this. Let's go ahead and put, like, Ring in the Mind on this, right? Like, hell, even if this was with Crest of Fire, it would just be completely busted. By the way, if you're wondering why you didn't see this particular build show up on the multiplayer fights, it's because the AI does not know how to use Dark Deeds. It's not on its skill list. Hopefully this changes in Reborn, but anyway. So, you know, you combine all this stuff, you're saving multiple skill slots, so suddenly, like, let's go down the list. Instead of axes, we have hammers. Okay, that's fine. True Strike, that's fine. They've got really high damage. Suddenly, they can keep Rampart Aura. That's fine. We can probably put Ogdark on this. Constitution, Lament, we don't need anymore. We can probably even put Max TP on this to potentially give them a damage scaler. So it just, like, completely widens up their different options there. So yeah, just again, many weird potential builds to think about here, but that was about that. So, there's your Spooky Bar breakdown. Have yourselves a good one, and I will see you in the next one, which, whatever, we'll see what the comments ask for. See you then.